In today's video, I want to talk with you about everything you need to know to get your LLC started the right way in the year 2025. Ready? Well, let's do this. Hey there, my name is Jim Hart. I'm back at you here from Hawthorn Law, also known as the Hart Law Firm, where we help entrepreneurs of all sizes to get started, to build their business, and to help you grow something that's truly amazing. It is a weird year right now in 2025. I know people are a little bit nervous and scared about what's going on with the new administration and everything else, but I thought that this would be a good time to talk with you about what it takes to properly set up an LLC in the climate that we're dealing with right now. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So if you are an aspiring entrepreneur, if you are a founder, or if you are a startup, or if you are, just trying to start a side hustle from, your garage and you're trying to get that business going here in 2025, this is everything that you're going to need to know to do it the right way, to do it the legal way. I actually just talked with a client about this on a call earlier today. They spent a lot of money to talk with me for about an hour and ask all the questions that I'm going to be giving to you in this video today. So hopefully you'll find this extra special and helpful to you. So most of you that are just getting started want to start a business because either A, maybe you're worried about your job right now, you're worried about what could happen with the economy, and maybe you're thinking this is a good time to start a business, or B, you're trying to start a side hustle and you want to build that to maybe potentially replace your day job or your income from your current full-time role. And whatever the reason might be, an LLC is a good starting point. Now, I know I've done some videos in the past about why you should start an LLC, why you shouldn't start an LLC, and I'll link to those videos down below in the description. But for purposes of today, we're not talking about whether or not you should or shouldn't. We're talking about what it takes to actually set up an LLC and why it is a good idea for your business. And chances are you're watching this video because you're just not sure what the next steps are for you in terms of starting a business on your own, and you're not sure how an LLC fits into what it is you're trying to do in terms of, providing yourself some extra income for you and your family right now. Now, before we get into the nuts and bolts of why an LLC is important and how to actually set it up the right way, I do want to talk with you about a couple of the things that might be at stake for you as you're starting your business. Now, I just talked to, like I said, this individual earlier today about all the issues surrounding an LLC. Some of the main reasons why people set these up are because they look at, well, what is the opportunity cost? What is going to happen to me if I don't set up an LLC? And there's a number of things. The one thing I would tell you most often is going to be regret, because an LLC is oftentimes that one thing, it's that one tangible thing that people need to get going with their business, to put some effort into their business. And once they have that LLC set up, it can provide a lot of confidence to an aspiring entrepreneur, someone who's never done this before, to make them feel like they actually are legitimate as a business owner. So one of the main, we'll call it opportunity costs, is the fact that regretting not taking the steps now to start your business, and then 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you're looking back thinking, man, I really wish I had done that now. And I can tell you from experience that this is how I felt at times when it comes to my law practice in terms of different things. Like, I wish I had started off working with businesses and entrepreneurs way earlier in my legal career than I did, but better late than never. And so now is the time to set up an LLC if this is something you're thinking about doing. Another great reason to be thinking about setting up your own business and starting an LLC is because right now we do live in uncertain times. And I'm not trying to scare you, but legitimately, we do live in a time where we have an incoming administration that is, doing all sorts of crazy things that are going to rock the boat in terms of business, with the tariffs, with laying people off at the federal level, different things. We don't know what's going to happen. And so it's times like these when a lot of people do tend to reach out and start their businesses because they have control over that. They don't necessarily have control over what is going on in the bigger sphere of the United States and the world, but they can control their own little bubble of what they're doing, and they can, if they want to start their own business, this is something that they can control and they can focus on. Another issue that I see people face is that their business maybe fails because they don't set it up correctly from the beginning. Again, this person I was talking to earlier today, they are in a high-risk business. They're in a business that where it would not be outside the realm of possibility for them to get sued if they mess something up on a job. And for that reason, it is important to make sure you have the proper legal protections in place to protect your personal assets from those of your business if you were to get sued or a client were to come after you. So that is a very important part of setting up the LLC the right way. And then finally, the other thing that's really at stake here is if you are looking to build and grow your business, you might need funding. You might need to go to the bank for a loan. You may need grants. You may need a whole bunch of other things. Maybe you're selling on, a platform like an Amazon, and you must have that LLC in place. You must have some branding in place, different things. And it's better to get that set up and easier to get that set up from the beginning than it is to wait until later on to do that. So hopefully that makes sense. I realize this is a long-winded intro, but I think it's important to have that background about LLCs and why they're important and what's at stake if you don't set one up. But right now I want to get into a little bit of the nuts and bolts of LLCs. And let's start with what an LLC is. It's called a limited liability company. And I do not have coffee mug today, but I do have a new mug, and you'll see it's got, hopefully you can see that, the Hart Law Firm, and then I put my name on the back. Cheers. So an LLC is short for limited liability company. It's basically a way to separate your personal assets from your business assets. It's a way to protect your personal assets from your business liabilities. That's why people set them up. That's why they're important. And who might do this? Well, if you are a freelancer, if you're starting an online business as an influencer of some sort, maybe you've got an affiliate business, maybe you are coaching or doing consulting of some sort, maybe you're just building a side hustle on the side, but it could be a high-risk business, as this person I talked to earlier today is. These are all people who maybe want to start a business. If you're a founder and you're looking to build a business that might be seeking funding at some point, then having an LLC or a corporation in place is definitely something that you need to think about. I'm not going to talk about the differences between corporations and LLCs. The general idea of setting up is very similar, although with corporations, you may need to do some other things that are beyond the scope of today's video. So just be aware of that. Questions you might want to ask yourself before you get into setting up a business include: how serious are you about your business? Is this a hobby? Is this something you're actually looking to make money off of? You're the only one that can answer that question, but that's very important and worth looking into. Is your business making money right now? So if your business is currently making money, then you probably need to get that LLC set up. If you're not making money yet and you're not sure when you're going to be making money, then maybe you can wait a little bit to set up your LLC. But again, there could be other considerations at play, and I'm not going to tell you blanketly you should or should not set up an LLC given where you are. If you've got questions about that, you're definitely going to want to talk to a lawyer and get all those questions answered before you make any decisions. I can tell you, if you set up an LLC the wrong way, it can be actually much more expensive to shut down than if you just get it started correctly from the very beginning. Now, another big question that I talk to people about when we're trying to gauge whether or not they should set up an LLC is: how risky is their business? Like, how likely is it they're going to get sued? If you're in a high-risk business, if you're selling products that people consume either on their body or in their mouth, if you are selling to kids, if you are in an industry that is rife with litigation like real estate or other things like that, and you're dealing with a lot of contracts, then chances are you may need to have that LLC in place. That's going to be much more important because you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you could potentially be sued. On the other hand, if you're in a relatively low-risk business, then maybe you don't need to worry as much about an LLC, but that's a question that you should ask for yourself. Another consideration you should be thinking about is: how important is it to you to project an air of professionalism about your business? So if you're dealing with individual clients and whether or not you have an LLC could indicate whether or not somebody hires you, then I would probably err on the side of setting up an LLC. If you are, going from door to door asking people if they need some extra help mowing their lawn, probably not as big of a deal to have that LLC, although you could have some liability considerations at play, especially if you're hiring employees, but that's a whole nother issue. We're talking about if it's just you and no employees at this point. As with anything, if you have questions about all this stuff, I would definitely want to talk to a lawyer about whether or not it makes sense for you to have that LLC in place. This is really important. This is the next issue, and that is: how are you going to set up the LLC? And there's three main options for setting up an LLC that you really should be thinking about. Option one, the easiest and simplest, is a DIY approach, that you're going to set up the LLC yourself. I actually have a monthly membership program where we have a course inside the membership on how to set up your own LLC on your own. So if that's something you're interested, again, there'll be a link down down below. If you just feel really comfortable that you can do it yourself, that is one option. The second option is going to be on the other side of the spectrum. You want to be completely hands-off. You don't want to have anything to do with setting up the LLC. You want to hire a lawyer. Now, hiring a lawyer is going to be the most expensive option in terms of setting up an LLC, but you know it's going to get done right, at least I would say 99.9 times out of 100, it's going to get done correctly. This is not an issue that is going to be difficult for many lawyers to do. And frankly, you might have some lawyers that are going to tell you they don't want to deal with it because it's just so simple and it's just not worth your time or money to hire them to do it. But if you did want to make sure it's done correctly, hiring a lawyer to do it is an option. The third option is going to be hire a service. And there are a couple services that I recommend. The nice thing about this is oftentimes they will do it for as little as no money. So they're not going to charge you to set up the LLC. They're just going to charge you the state filing fees. They will often include registered agent service for a year, for the first year after you sign up with them. And they may have other options and benefits that are associated with that service. So I'm not going to name any names of services on this video, but I will include links down below to some services that I do recommend. Now, keep in mind, these are going to be affiliate links. And so if you do purchase through one of these services, my law firm will get a small commission. This is a good option for a lot of people because they know that it's going to be set up the right way. And oftentimes the fees are minimal and you're just going to get your paperwork back and everything's going to be good. What you do need to be careful of when you're dealing with some of these services, though, is the upsells. A lot of times they will upsell you things that are maybe not necessary for what you're doing with your business. So you do need to be a little bit careful about that. But as long as you know what you want, setting up the LLC, getting your EIN, having them serve as your registered agent, it's money well spent because you're going to get that set up correctly. And frankly, you're probably going to waste a lot less time doing it than if you try and do it yourself. The number one issue I see with a lot of people that try and set up their LLCs on their own is they just sit on it. They get nervous. They're not sure they're doing it correctly. They think they might be messing something up. And then they just don't ever do it. Not having that LLC set up because you're just sitting on it is worse than doing it and spending a little bit of money to have a service do it for you. So if you spend a little bit more money to do it through them, that might be a better option. Let's talk about some of the preliminary questions that you might need to think about as you're setting up your LLC. Now, the first question I get, and this is universal, almost anyone I talk to about LLCs ask this question, and that is, where do they set up their LLC? And I will tell you 99.9% of the time, if you are a U.S. citizen and you live in the United States, setting up the LLC where you live, in the state where you live, is going to be the best option. If you set it up in a different state, you can run into a whole bunch of issues. I'm not even going to get into that. That's beyond the scope of this video. I've talked about that before in some of my videos where I talk about the mistakes people make in setting up their LLCs. Setting up an LLC in a state outside of where you live is one of those mistakes. One caveat to that, if you live abroad, like in Europe or Asia or someplace else, and you're looking to set up a business here in the United States, but you are a U.S. citizen, or maybe you're not a U.S. citizen, and you want to have a business in the United States, then you can pretty much pick whatever state is going to make the most sense for you. In that case, you might want to look at which state is the cheapest. You can go to states like Wyoming or Nevada or Colorado or New Mexico or, Texas or Florida or wherever. Most of these states are fairly inexpensive, but you want to check into that. There's lots of options for there. I'm not going to give you a recommendation here, although I will tell you I'm licensed in Florida. In Florida, it's fairly straightforward, fairly simple to set up an LLC down there. It's a good option for a lot of people, and especially if you plan on visiting the United States and going to Florida for a vacation, then maybe that's a good option, and you can write that off as a business trip as you go down there to set up your business. Once you've decided which state you're going to set your LLC up in, the next thing you need to do is pick a name for your LLC. A lot of people get confused on this and think it needs to be the same as the name of their brand, and I talk to a lot of people about this because a big part of my business is going to be trademarks and setting up and registering trademarks for clients, but your trademark does not need to be the same name as your LLC. So if you're worried that you don't want to set up your LLC until you know the name is available, well, all you need to do to set that up is go to the Secretary of State where you intend to set up your LLC and do a search. And most states have a search function so you can see what LLCs have already been chosen. You can pick a name as long as it is unique and has an identifier behind it, i.e. LLC, limited liability company, LTD, something like that. That's typically going to be required from the state. Then you should be fine. It just needs to be a unique name. You don't want to be the same as someone else. Now, the next consideration is, do you need to have a registered agent? I will tell you, I think it's a smart choice. I've heard people say they should just pick themselves, and people online in Facebook groups and other places are probably going to tell you, well, just pick yourself. Name yourself as the registered agent. It's the easiest thing. It's free. I don't necessarily agree with that advice, especially if you have a job with another business where you have to go into an office every day. The whole purpose of a registered agent is so that you can get mail that's designated for your business, and not just any mail. We're talking about legal mail. We're talking about tax notices, lawsuits, subpoenas, different things like that. You do not want to use your registered agent as your business address. Because a registered agent is necessary to effect what is called due process or service of process in the event that you get sued or your business gets sued, you want to make sure that you use a corporate registered agent. I think that's just the best option. Like I said, the service that I recommend that's going to be down in the description below is typically going to be, they're going to include the first year of registered agent for free. After that, it's like $100, $150 a year. It's a small price to pay to make sure that you're not in default of some legal judgment because you don't get service on your business. So that's what I would recommend. Also, one of the main requirements of a registered agent is that it be open and conducting business during normal business hours, Monday through Friday. And if you're at another job where you're not home to get mail that might come to your business, or if a sheriff were to show up at your house and try and serve you with papers if you were to get sued, then again, you could be held in default and you don't want that. The next issue that you're going to need to be thinking about before you file anything with your state is what is going to be your business address. Now, for a lot of people that are running a business virtually, it might be their home address, and you may not want to include your home address on your paperwork and make that public. And the way you can get around that is you can either pick a P.O. box or a virtual address if your state will allow that and they're okay with you doing a virtual address. If they're not okay with that, you might need to look into some other options, but for most states, that's going to be sufficient. I would recommend setting up that service before you file your LLC paperwork so you don't need to do a change of address later on in the process. The next issue you're going to need to be thinking about is, should you be member managed or manager managed? In North Carolina, the default where I practice law is manager managed, and that basically means that the members elect a manager that runs the business that may or may not have an ownership stake in the business. You can also be member managed, that works too, but this is a decision you're going to need to make. I've done other videos that talk about the distinctions between member managed and manager managed and what it means for your LLC. You might want to check those resources out. I'll include links down below. But that is another consideration you're going to need to think about. Now, when you're filing your articles of organization, that is not something that you maybe necessarily need to put on the articles. Some states do have a check the box to say, is this going to be member managed or manager managed? Other states don't. It just depends where you live and where you're filing your LLC. Once you have filled out your articles of organization and you've provided all this information, the name of the LLC, your business address, who the owners are going to be, member managed, manager managed, different things like that. The next thing you want to do is you're going to file those articles of organization with the state. You need to make sure some states have very interesting rules regarding what needs to happen either before or after you file these documents with the state. Some states can be a little bit tricky. Some require subsequent filings. Some require pre-authorization or pre-filings. You want to check with your state and make sure that you don't have any weird rules about that. Again, I do have a monthly membership program. In that program is a course on how to set up your LLC, and I do have a state-by-state guide that talks about what all the requirements are in each state. And so that's something you may want to think about if you have questions on what to do in your state. Again, and this is going to be if you're DIYing it as opposed to using a service that's going to handle all this for you. The next thing we need to talk about is your operating agreement. Now, a lot of people get confused about why an operating agreement is necessary, especially if it is a single member LLC, meaning that you're the only owner of the business, or maybe it's you and a spouse that own the business. What an operating agreement does is it basically gives you the rules that you're going to use to operate your business, how you're going to take distributions, how you're going to tax your business, what would happen, under what situation would you wind down the business, what happens if you want to bring in new members of the business. You can do this without an operating agreement because every state has a default set of rules under their LLC statute that dictate how an LLC is going to be governed. But oftentimes those rules are a little bit murky, or maybe they just don't make sense, or maybe they're not really what you want to do and how you want to set up your LLC. So a lot of times it's just easier to have your own operating agreement. Again, I'll have a link down below to a template operating agreement that you can use for your business if that's something you want to do. I highly recommend you set up an operating agreement. Now, if you are going to have other partners, then I recommend you talk to a lawyer, because you're going to need somebody to draft a more detailed operating agreement that basically outlines all the rights and responsibilities of the different people that are going to be involved in the day-to-day operations of your business. If it's just you, having a simple templated operating agreement is probably going to be sufficient, but you do want to make sure it's signed off on and you keep that with your important documents and papers. In the event anything ever happened to you, God forbid you became disabled, could not operate the business, you need somebody else to step in for you, or worse, or if your business were to get sued and you needed to have that in place to show that you are actually following the corporate formalities of your business. And by having this operating agreement in place, that's going to be another way that you can avoid anyone piercing the corporate veil when it comes to trying to get at your personal assets if they were to sue you. So you filed your articles of organization, you've got your operating agreement in place. The next thing you need to do is make sure you apply for an EIN number. It is not required for your LLC, but I highly recommend you do this. It is another way that you can keep your business separate from your personal. And so you're going to use that EIN number that you set up for the LLC to go and open a business bank account. Setting up an EIN number for your business is not difficult. You have to go through the IRS website. Only wrinkle in this would be if you are someone who lives abroad and you're trying to set up an LLC in the United States, but you don't actually have a social security number. In that situation, it's going to be a little bit more complicated, but it is something that can be done. There are services that will help you to get an EIN number for your LLC if that's something you'd like to do. And frankly, it's something you probably should do. As long as you are a U.S. citizen and you already have a social security number, or if you're a legal resident and you have a tax ID number, then you should be able to get an EIN without too many issues. And then once you've set up the EIN number, you can go ahead and set up a business bank account. I will have, again, links below to some resources that I would use in terms of setting up that business bank account. I have some relationships with banks that I think are great. Personally, I use Fidelity Investments as my business bank account for my online business, not for my law firm, but there's reasons for that. And that is a great bank. You can submit all the paperwork electronically. You may need to get some stamps or seals or different things like that from a local bank or a notary. But other than that, you can mail everything in and it's pretty easy. Other places, and I will include links down below, will allow you to just sign up online and maybe upload the documentation that you need. Once you have your business bank account, you've got your EIN number, you've got your operating agreement, your articles of organization have been filed, you have a legitimate LLC, you're going to want to make sure that you set up and file your BOI report. This is the Beneficial Ownership Information Form that's required by the Financial Crimes Enforcement Unit. Now, I know you're watching this video and you're like, wait a minute, Jim. I've heard there's litigation about that. I've heard that the Trump administration is not going to enforce it. I've heard this, I've heard that. That's fine. Yes, you have. And all of those things are true. However, right now, it's still the law. It's still something you have to do. I would not put your business at risk or put yourself at risk for financial or criminal penalties by failing to comply with this law right now. I would just go ahead and submit the form online to comply with that. It's not difficult. Again, I'll include a link down below to the website where you can go ahead and submit that information. Now, the last thing you're going to want to do, and this is probably the number one mistake that I see a lot of people make when it comes to their LLCs, is they fail to follow the proper procedures to keep their LLC compliant. What do I mean by that? Well, there's going to be, at a minimum, biannual requirements. Some states do not have annual reporting requirements, but that is few and far between. Most states do have annual reporting requirements. Some, it's every other year. Some, it's every year on the anniversary of when you first filed your LLC. Some, there's a set date like the tax day. It just depends on the state where you live and where you're operating your LLC, but you do want to make sure you make note of any requirements that you need to follow to keep your LLC compliant. And that's really important to make sure that you don't become administratively dissolved. I see that all the time with people where we have to help them go and get their LLCs set back up. It's a lot more money to get it set back up the right way, and you have to pay all the back taxes and fees and penalties and different things like that. You don't want to do that. Just make sure you set it up the right way, and then check the box, put a tickler on your calendar, something, reminder on your phone, to go ahead and make sure that you submit your annual reports when you need to do that and pay whatever fees you need to pay to keep your LLC legit. I will say, setting up your LLC, it's a smart thing to do. It's going to give you a lot of confidence when it comes to your business. It's going to protect your personal assets from the liabilities of your business. All in all, it's a very smart thing to do. You're going to look more professional when you're dealing with your clients. You are going to have more credibility, different things like that. So if you haven't already, I highly recommend you think about setting up an LLC if you're getting started with business. If you have questions or you need help with this, we're available. As I mentioned before, we have a monthly membership program that you can join where you can hop on coaching calls with me or schedule calls with me whenever you want to answer any questions you might have about this process. And I'm here to help. I promise I will try not to take another 6 months before I do another video, but we will get back at it and keep providing you the information you need to keep your business legally protected. If you got more questions, here's another video right here about some of the mistakes you might make with your LLC. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.